Today we're learning about midpoint. So rather than finding the distance between 2 points, this time we want to know what the middle is between 2 points. So we do have a formula for this. So the midpoint equals, we have x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y2 plus y1 divided by 2. The x and the y, the order of them, like in the top, like whether you do x1 plus x2 or x2 plus x1 doesn't matter because you can add things in any order. And so really you're just adding the x's together, dividing it by 2, adding the y's together, dividing it by 2. So essentially we're kind of averaging the x's and then averaging the y's. And that will give you your midpoint. So we're going to use that formula to find the midpoint for this first example here. So the midpoint is, if you need to label these, you can, like x1, y1, x2, y2. But just remember, add the x's together, divide by 2. So we'll have negative 2 plus 4 divided by 2, and then 12 minus 10 plus negative 10, either way, divided by 2. So you need to do negative 2 plus 4 first, and then divide by 2, or make sure you put this top part in parentheses, because if you just write in your calculator negative 2 plus 4 divided by 2, it won't give you the correct answer because it's only going to divide this number by 2. So make sure that it is in parentheses, or you do it first, like you get 2 and then divide that by 2. So for example, for our first one, we would get 2 over 2, and then 12, and we take away 10, so we'd have negative 2 over 2. And then we can simplify that down so that our midpoint is 1, negative 1. And your midpoint will come out to be a point, so we're trying to get an x and a y point. So let's try that again for our next one. So midpoint equals, so let's just add together the x's. So 3 plus 7 divided by 2, add together the y's. So we'll have 5, and then I just did that all at once there. And then we'll have negative 8. All right, for this one, so we can kind of visually see where the midpoint might be, but let's double check and use the formula to make sure that we are finding this midpoint correctly. So our first point is negative 1, negative 1, and then our second point is negative 5, negative 5. So let's add together our x's. So we'll have negative 1 minus 5, or plus negative 5, divided by 2, and then same thing, say the same numbers. So negative 1 divided by, minus 5 divided by 2 is going to be negative 3. So it'll be the same thing. And we can see that my estimation right there, it was correct. So that one we were able to count, but we just double checked with the midpoint formula there. This time we want to find out what is the end point when given one midpoint and an end point. So for example, in this first one, we are given that our midpoint is like over 8 up 14, just estimation there, and we have an endpoint of negative 9, negative 1. And so we're trying to figure out where is this other endpoint. And if you sketch a picture like this, it can also help you make sure that your answer makes sense. So our answer should be a pretty big positive number and a pretty big positive number. So like in our x and our y, x and y should both be a large positive number based on my picture here. So we're going to use the midpoint formula again. So I'm going to erase this and rewrite our midpoint formula down here. And essentially what we're going to do is just like plug things in. So I know that my midpoint is 8, 14. So this whole thing equals 8. This whole thing equals 14. So let's write that in equation form now. So x1 plus x2 divided by 2 is 8. And then y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is 14. Now we do have one thing. We have a point. We have an x1 and a y1. So we can replace our x1 and our y1 with that. So my x1 is -9, my y1 is -1. Now we just need to solve. So we can take times 2 on both sides to get rid of that 2 on the bottom. We'll have -9 plus x2 equals 16. Add 9 to both sides, and so my x2 is 25. Here, multiply both sides by 2 again. So those cancel out, and I get -1 plus y2 equals 28. Add 1 to both sides, so y2 equals 29. So our end point, we need to write this in point form, is 25, 29. Move this over here so we have enough room for our next problem. So that's kind of the formula way. There's also kind of a visual way that you can think about it. I'm going to show that for the second one here, if this makes sense to you. If not, just use the formula. So let's say we have an endpoint of -2 up 7, so around there. And then we have the midpoint of -12 up 10. And we want to know, what is this other point, right? So if we think of it as kind of like a number line almost, our midpoint is -12, 10. We have an endpoint of -2, 10. What is the difference between my x's? Here, so between -12 and -2, what's the difference between those? So to do that, you would just do -12 minus -2. So the distance between them would be -10, and the difference between something needs to be like positive numbers. The difference is 10, but since we know we need a negative number, so -10 between the x's. Now what is my difference between the y's? I wrote that wrong there. Say those are the same number. There we go. That should be 7. So our difference between those, 10 minus 7, is 3. So we want the same difference between the x's and the y's on this side now. So to get from -12 to -2, I added 10, right? So now, from -12 to whatever is going to be over here, I'm going to subtract 10. So I would have -22. We want the same difference. Now what's the difference between the y's? To get from 10 to 7, we added 3. So now I'm going to subtract 3 from my 10. So 10 minus 3 . Whoops, sorry. 10 minus 3 is 7. Oh, sorry, from 10 to 7 we subtracted 3, so we want to add 3 this time. So 10 plus 3, so we'd have 13. So our point would be -22 up 13. And that's just looking and making sure that the difference between the x's and the difference between the y's are the same. So if you forget that formula, that's another way that we can look at that. But let's go back and just use the formula again for this last one. So use our midpoint formula. So my midpoint is 6, 9. So remember, these will be equal to each other, and then these will be equal to each other. So formula-wise, I'm going to have, I know what my x1 is, so I'm going to have 10 plus my x2 divided by 2 equals 6. I know what my y1 is, 12 plus y2 divided by 2 equals 9. Multiply both sides by 2, so we'll get 10 plus x squared equals 12. 12 minus 10 is 2. Multiply by both sides by 2 here again, so 12 plus y2 equals 18. Take 18 and subtract 12. So y2 equals 6. This is x2, so I will have 2, 6 as my answer for this one. Okay, we have a word problem this time. So Craig is traveling for summer to Peru. He leaves from Georgia at 0.56. So I'm going to sketch a little graph here. So over 5 up 16, he leaves from Georgia. He stops at the halfway point, Panama, which is 6:12. And what is the ordered pair of Peru, and how far is Panama from Peru? So we'll say this is Panama, and he's trying to get to Peru, which is going to be somewhere down here. So he starts in Georgia, and this is our midpoint because it's halfway. So we're doing the same thing as above and looking for what is that last point there. So my midpoint is the Panama one, so 6, 12. My x1 is going to be the 5 in Georgia. And then my y1 will be my 16. So now I want to solve for x2 and y2. So multiply both sides by 2. So x2 is 12 minus 5, so 7. And then y2. So take both sides by 2. 24 minus 16, which is 8. So 7, 8 is my point for Peru. Now, how far is Panama from Peru? So over 7 up 8 is my point. How far? We're going to have to use the distance formula now. So I want to know if I have points 6, 12 and 7, 8, what is the distance between them? So you could draw a graph here and create a triangle to use the distance formula. Or if you remember the distance formula or just want to use that, you can do that as well. So I'll label these as x and y. So 7 minus 6 squared plus 8 minus 12 squared. Then we'll have the square root. 7 minus 6 is 1 squared plus 8 minus 12, which would be negative 4 squared. So the square root of 1 plus 16, so the square root of 17. I'm just going to leave that in radical form, and that will be our answer for that one.